I look out on the world, I'm more certain than ever of the power and significance of the collaborative, problem-solving global platform we call SOLVE.
Education Modified is a research-based solution to provide teachers with technology to address all the special needs in their class with research-based content and workflow tools.
Refactor is an online platform to develop tech and human skills. It is designed to help individuals and organizations succeed in the workplace of the future.
SOLVE is an initiative of MIT, and its mission is to solve world challenges. How do we do that? We launch specific challenges every year. We find incredible social entrepreneurs from all around the world, and we accelerate their work.
The way MIT convenes all these minds from every different corner, whether it's Yo-Yo Ma in arts and culture or neuroscientists, that give you just such different perspectives.
Whether it's with an NGO, private sector, or government and legislation, this idea of partnership, I think, is one of the singular advantages that SOLVE has.
SOLVE is creating a marketplace for social impact innovators. It's really about the community, and it's really about you making this happen as much as us.
The SOLVE community has really advanced our work in providing support at a variety of levels, particularly with technology, mentorship and advice.
Thanks to MIT Solve, we are able to develop a compelling product vision. Solve has helped us amplify our impact.
Most of all, the whole point of Solve is service.
When I looked at the Earth, to me, it's so clear we're all one crew. And I just thought if only people could find each other, we could solve everything.
Everybody should have a place at the problem-solving table.
Please welcome to the stage, Arcgis, Executive Director, MIT Solve.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Solve at MIT. I'm Alex Samuel, Executive Director of MIT Solve. It's amazing to be back here. This is our first time convening in person since May 2019, and it feels wonderful to be here with all of you, students, faculty, Solver teams, innovators, Solve members and partners, and more. We have an exciting program we put together for you today, but before I dive in and tell you more what's in stock, let me first introduce and welcome to the stage Rafael Reif, the president of MIT.
Thank you, Alex, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me do that again. Good afternoon, everyone. That feels better. I feel welcome. To the Solve community, I'm delighted, truly delighted to be here with all of you on campus once again. And to our 2020 and 2021 class of solvers, congratulations. And to all of you, welcome to MIT. MIT Solve comprises an impressive array of backgrounds and talents, a vibrant cross-section of creativity. Looking back on all that this remarkable community has accomplished, it is hard to believe that it has been only a few years since we started. We launched MIT Solve for a simple and powerful reason. MIT places distinctive emphasis on impact. We want to get our ideas out into the world where they can make a difference. From the beginning, we knew that to make truly meaningful progress and impact, MIT could not go it alone. We do have a brilliant community of talented students and faculty who want to make the world better. But we are not everywhere, and we do not have all the answers. And we believed that help was out there in people across the country and the world with innovative ideas and fresh approaches to solving the most urgent problems locally and globally. MIT wanted to connect with the energy, determination, and local expertise of young innovators around the world. And we believed they would benefit from connecting with each other and with resources to help them achieve their objectives. MIT Solve is the channel we built to bring these two groups together. The solver teams on the ground who have bold, ambitious ideas with enormous potential, and the partners who share their vision and can provide the resources they need to further develop and scale their solutions. MIT Solve is now a global community with the ability to take on a wide range of challenges and drive transformational change in our own backyard and in every corner of the world. We're all aware that we live in a time when the human population is radically tied together by global challenges like climate change, environmental degradation, war, a pandemic. But we're also fragmented by those same issues. This divisiveness is painful. But MIT Solve, an initiative designed to unite people in doing good, allows us to stay optimistic by building a better future. It has been an immense pleasure to watch Solve take root, grow, and evolve. I'm deeply grateful to this community of imaginative, dedicated, and courageous innovators and partners, and I look forward to seeing the groundbreaking, inspiring solutions you will bring to life in the years ahead. Thank you all for being a part of MIT Solve. And with that, let's get started.
Thank you very much, Rafael, for this kind introduction and for all you've done for Solve. It's truly wonderful to be back here with all of you, and not a moment too soon. So much has transpired in the last 3 years since we've all been together. The global pandemic, continued increasing inequality across the world, a renewed racial justice movement, new war and displacement, and the ever-present looming climate crisis, to name but just a few. Today is also the National Day of Awareness of Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit, and an issue you will hear more about in this upcoming session. In ways big and small, we have all experienced or witnessed great loss, suffering, and disconnection. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that and to send my thoughts to those who are still suffering today. What gives me hope in the face of all of this? In one word, you. And more eloquently said by one of our past speakers, Laila June, an indigenous poet and activist from the Diné Nation, in her song All Nations Rise, that she performed for us during Solve at MIT 2019. We know that we are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones that grandma's been praying for. You are all here today, taking time out of your busy lives because you are committed to using technology and innovation in service of solving the world's most intractable challenges, in service of the most marginalized and underserved among us. And that is what Solve is all about. Our mission is to drive innovation to solve world challenges. We see ourselves as a marketplace for social impact innovation, and we bring together innovators, cross-sector leaders, academics, and more to find connections and broken partnerships to bring forth innovative solutions and help better the world. Today, for the first time in 3 years, this marketplace is back in action, live and in person. I'm very excited. But even if we couldn't always meet in person, the work didn't stop. And in fact, in many cases, it grew and accelerated during this pandemic. The Solve community, like the MIT community, stepped up to meet the moment and some of the big challenges of our time. In March 2020, we notably launched a Health Security and Pandemics Challenge, which received hundreds of applications. And in 2020, we launched a domestic challenge, the Anti-Racist Technology in the US Challenge. We now have over 200 Solver teams and 10 Solver innovators headquartered in 49 countries. Our 28 Indigenous fellows represent 18 American Indian tribes. And I'm so happy to say that we have our 2020 and 2021 Solver teams with us here today. So they are sitting right here in front. They have traveled all the way from Brazil, Micronesia, Botswana, and more. So let's please give it all up for our incredible Solver teams and Indigenous fellows. Woo! Woo! Thanks to our Solve members and sponsors, we have brokered over 500 partnerships and $50 million of grant and investment funding to our Solver teams and social entrepreneurs worldwide. You will hear soon about some of their work and the partnerships we have helped catalyze, but do check out our website and this Solver map for more information. I also wanted to take a moment to dearly thank our sponsors and partners who make all this work possible. General Motors, the Mortgage Family Foundation, HP, Vodafone America's Foundation, Binance Charity, Living Proof, and many more. Thank you. Woo! And our work continues unabated in 2022. I'm excited to say that we just closed our 2022 challenges and received over 1,100 applications from 117 countries. Bravo to all the people who applied, and you'll be hearing from us soon for the finalist selection. And I'm happy to say that thanks to our prize funders, we now have over $2 million available in funding for the 2022 challenges. And it's not too late to join and add your prize to this, but that's really exciting for us as well. While the challenges are now closed, there's still opportunity to join us if you want to be a reviewer or a mentor, or join us for Solve Challenge Finals in New York City in September, where we'll announce the new class of Solver team and Indigenous fellows. At Solve, we aim to answer, how do we help problem solvers, no matter where they are, advance their innovative solutions to the world's most pressing problems? In that spirit, we are starting Solve at MIT with this opening plenary, and our theme is ethical and inclusive innovation, solving with, by, and for the most underserved. And to discuss this topic, we're taking you on a journey around the world, to Iran, to the refugee camps in Jordan, to Ukraine, to the Menominee Nation, and then right back here in Cambridge. Through these conversations, we will get to meet some incredible people. They are not only thinking about the intersection of technology, innovation, and social impact, but they are also taking action and bringing forth their own solutions. Here's some of the incredible lineup you get to look forward to. But before we get started with this incredible journey, I wanted to give you an exclusive preview of a documentary project our friends at Red Glass Pictures have been working on, thanks to a gift from our sponsor, HP. For the last few months, they have been following 3 of our Solver teams and Indigenous Communities fellows, Danielle Boyer from Every Kid Gets a Robot, Kimberly Seals-Allers from Earth, and Kitty Liao from Spire. The documentary will come out in the fall, but we're pretty excited about it. So let's watch this preview now.
Here in New York City, the Black maternal mortality rate is up to 12 times that of white women. 12 times.
The statistics are staggering. The disparity in care is costing Black women their lives.
Centuries of poverty and marginalization among Indigenous people.
When I saw how so many Indigenous youth like me get left behind, I was like, this is not fair. For me, the answer was robots.
There are 18.4 million children not getting ASIC vaccinations because of the challenges of the last mile transportation. I was shocked, and then I thought there must be a way to solve it.
We are on a mission to eradicate racism and bias from maternity and infant care.
I want to give students robots who wouldn't have them otherwise. It's a lot.
The goal is to create a reliable cooling device to deliver these life-saving vaccines to the people who need them. Even though I know this is the right thing to do, it's just bloody difficult.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here at MIT Solve today. My name is Helena Samsu. I'm the CEO and founder at Globi and a 2021 Solver. Today, thousands of drones are flying around in our skies every day, capturing beautiful pictures. But those pictures are so much more than just beautiful. They contain information, they contain data. Detailed data, often missed by satellite imagery, such as being able to identify mosquito breeding sites before they become malaria-transmitting mosquitoes. They also help us update realities when old data sets tell us that reality is brown when it's really green. And why does this matter? Well, with a faulty view on reality, we tend to make faulty decisions. So at Globi, we were thinking, what if we could tap into all the drones out there and be able to share an updated and high-resolution view of the world to decision makers around the world so they can make more informed decisions. So we did. Today, the platform is called Crowdrowning, and it's connected to over 5,400 drones in 102 countries collecting image data on demand. And through an API integration, that data from the drones is being sent directly into our end users' databases. Since each image that the drone captured is geotagged, it's also easy to identify exactly where action might be needed. Today, crowdrowning is being used to help track risk areas for malaria outbreaks in Malawi, help combating desertification along the Great Green Wall in the Sahel region, monitoring water pollution with water purification plants in Sweden, and mapping damages post-tropical cyclones in Fiji, to name a few use cases. What started as a small idea with me flying my drones some years ago has now turned into a global movement of thousands of drone operators collecting data every day. It's truly inspiring for me as an entrepreneur to be able to be part of a movement where drone operators from all over the world come together for the same cause, to be able to create a better future for people and the planet with their drones. Thank you very much for listening to my talk here today.
Please welcome to the stage your moderator for this afternoon's plenary, Chief Executive Officer of the Boston Globe, Linda Henry.
Hello, it is so wonderful to be here together at this incredible conference, Solve at MIT. I am honored to be your moderator for the opening plenary conversations. This gathering, as you know, is really, really special and just endlessly inspiring, as you've already heard and with the guests that we have coming up to talk today. I have been a witness to this dream of Solve since its very, very early days, when the idea of this almost Davos on the Charles was a twinkle in President Reif's eyes. It's this gathering to actually solve some of our greatest challenges. President Reif and the talented team here had been to plenty of conferences, and this bold idea to not just talk about what needs to be done and the way things are, but to serve as a catalytic convener to bring the resources, the research, the focus, and the smartest people out there who care to change our future. I am incredibly proud that this conference is here in Cambridge as well, where thanks to the world-class educational and medical institutions, this region has a long history of tackling some of the hardest problems out there, the success of which has done nothing less than change the world. This conference understands that this wave of real disruption, of really solving some of these problems, is not just what technology can do, but real change is at the intersection of art, science, and technology. The fantastic lineup today reflects that, combined with a critical appreciation of humanity. So now I am delighted to introduce our first conversation, starting off with an exceptionally exciting guest, Dr. Shirin Abadi, the founder of Defenders of Human Rights Center based in Iran and winner of the 2003 Nobel Peace Prize for her tireless work on human rights and democracy. She will be joining us from London and speaking in Farsi, who will be accompanied by her translator, Shirin Ershadi, who is based in California. So to aid in the translation, I will fit the conversation into 3 questions and give more space for her to speak without interruptions. So please welcome Dr. Abadi. Hello, how are you?
Good day to all of you and all of the people who can hear me today.
Wonderful. Dr. Abadi, you've been a leading voice in international human rights, women and girls advocacy, and democracy for decades. Thinking about the challenges before us, where ethical innovation would make a difference, can you share with us where you see the greatest needs for action?
Today's world sees a lot of challenges. For example, the global warming, all of the wars that are going on in different parts of the world. We see scarcity of food, expansion of poverty, and I'm very sorry that we have not been able to find a solution because our challenges have become more and more. For example, when we look at the Second World War, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was being written, the issue of global warming or access to the internet or the environment were not regarded because they were not issues there. And this example will tell us that our challenges are being grown and continued. Now, I just want to tell you a challenge that I think is the infrastructure, and that is the sliding of democracy, and the fact that people's role and importance is not being regarded. This is happening in different countries. We can see it in Europe, for example. We see that the right is taking over and populism taking over. For example, if you think about 20 years ago, I don't think the people of France would think that someone like Marine Le Pen get all these votes, or after the collapse citizens, meaning that we have not been able to support democracy. I want to give you an example. I want to compare it to a nice flower pot that you have at home. For example, you have to put it in the correct light, you have to water it every day. But if you forget about it for a full month, it will die. The flower will die. The same thing is true about democracy. So our only duty as citizens is not to pay taxes or just go to the ballot box. We have to control and hold accountable the people that we have elected. They have to respond to us, and we have to supervise them so that they cannot abuse the power that people have invested in them. So, and if we neglect that, if we don't supervise them, if we don't hold accountable people that we have elected, democracy is gonna slide. And in such slide, we will witness more challenges and different challenges.
That is an excellent point about democracy and the need for nurturing and tending of democracy that we need to do. So thinking specifically about the lessons you've learned from your work in Iran and at the Defender of Human Rights Center, what can you share about the challenges of countering authoritarian governance grounded in notions of populism?
So, please first let me give you my definition of democracy. In the 20th century, we always thought that it's like the support of the people, the will of the people, and elections that is called democracy. But let's not forget that Hitler and Khomeini in Iran and Bashar Assad in Syria, Putin in Russia, they have all been elected by the people. So, an individual or the party that has been elected does not have the right to rule as they like, and they don't have the right to abuse their power. There is a standard for democracy, and I think that the party or the winner of the elections has to observe that standard, and that is human rights, the standards of human rights. What I want to say is that the governments do not get their legitimacy from the ballot box, but the ballot box and respect for human rights. But now, I just want to tell you about my country, Iran, after I've given you the definition for democracy. In 1979, there was a revolution in Iran, and over 90% of the people voted for the Islamic Republic. Unfortunately, as a result of such election, we got a religious dictatorship. And this government thinks that they are the guardian of people in this world, and also they want to bring everyone to heaven. And they don't give them the right not to go to heaven. And so, on the basis of the laws that they have all approved, like the consumption of alcohol or even trading alcohol, has a punishment of 80 lashes of flogging. Abortion is not only banned, but even contraceptives and condoms are prohibited in Iran. And sexual relations outside of a marriage is a crime. And the punishment begins from 100 lashes, and sometimes it gets up to stoning people. Homosexuality is a crime in Iran, and it bears heavy punishments. And pursuant to the law in Iran, the life of a woman is worth half of that of a man. Meaning, if me and my brother, we go on the street and we're attacked, they're saying the compensation paid to my brother is twice as much the compensation paid to me. And pursuant to the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran and other laws in Iran, are based on the basis of discrimination, as on the basis of gender, ethnicity, and religion. And that has caused dissatisfaction. And these are Stone Age laws, and we see the expansion of poverty as well. And that results in dissatisfaction of people too. Iran is a very wealthy country, but more than half of the people live under the line of poverty. There are three issues that result in the expansion of poverty. First is the embezzlement of the government and the cronies of the government. Secondly, it is the politics, it's the policies of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Because at the beginning of the revolution, Iran decided to intervene in other countries' affairs and spent a lot of money. The money that has to go to schools, to hospitals, but they're sent to the Hezbollah in Lebanon, to the Houthis in Yemen, and the militia in other countries. And of course, the third issue is the economic sanctions in Iran. And this has happened because of the enrichment of uranium without observing the supervision of the IAEA. And since the government of Iran interferes in the affairs of its neighbors, it has been isolated. So it's only Russia and China who strategically support Iran, and that's because of all the profits that they make out of this and support Iran. So even when Ukraine was attacked, Iran took the part of Russia and is broadcasting the propaganda of the Putin regime in Iran. And so when the people of Iran who wanted to support the Ukrainian people took to the streets, they were attacked by the police, and some of them were apprehended. The people of Iran take to the streets peacefully, and they bring their opposition through the civil society, and they go to the streets, to rallies, and bring their opposition to the world. One of these groups are the teachers. These teachers close schools 1 day per month, and they bring their opposition to the streets. Also, it's the laborers, it's the students, it's the women. They all state their opposition to the government and their dissatisfaction of this. And although these statistics are informal, but at this time we have 1,000 political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in Iraq. Under these conditions, my colleagues and myself have become the voice of the people of Iran and the challenges they face. And I want to bring the voice of the people of Iran who want a democratic and secular government in Iran. I have used my Nobel Prize money to buy a condominium to make an NGO for the human rights in Iran. However, all of the property that I had was confiscated, even my personal property and the NGO. But they cannot confiscate my tongue and they cannot confiscate my pen. And so up to now, I have been able to bring the voice of people to get to democracy.
Dr. Abadi, thank you so much for sharing your journey and the incredible work that you're doing to fight for human rights and the lesson and perspective that you shared today. So thank you very much for your time. We now continue our journey, moving not too far from our discussions about Iran to our refugee camps in Jordan, where over 100,000 people are living because of the ongoing conflict in Syria and surrounding areas. Please welcome to the stage for a fascinating conversation about design, human rights, and ethical innovation, Azra Azra, I cannot say your last name correctly, so please come out and you can correct me. She is the Director of Art, Culture, and Technology Program, the Future Heritage Lab at MIT. Thank you so much. So sorry, I cannot say that. Azra is solving universal challenges at the very human intersection of art, architecture, and historic preservation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I had so much fun learning about your work, and it made a deep impression on me, and I watched some of our lectures. The students here who are lucky enough to take your course, I can't recommend it enough. So to start with, there's going to be some photos that are going to be revolving. Can you give us some context on what we're going to be seeing?
So we're going to see some images from Al Azra refugee camp in Jordan. This is the second largest camp in the country, and it houses around 40,000 Syrian refugees, exclusively Syrian refugees. It's the second built camp in the country. The largest one has around 90,000 people, and these people have been living there for years in this particular camp since 2014. And you see images from scenes from the camps, but also some of the inventions that people are making to alleviate the humanitarian aid failures, and some of the work we have done together with the people, residents of the camp, with the Future Heritage Lab.
I think it's really helpful to have these pictures, and I know you'll integrate more of them into your stories, but one of the things that I really took away from studying your work is that you really have advocated of solving with people rather than for people, that we're sitting here in Cambridge and we can identify what the problems are, but that you really need to incorporate the humanity and the culture and the full people that you're solving for.
Exactly. When we are working with these fragile communities, often you have these best intentions, right? But sometimes, as we know, best intentions might not lead to best solutions. Or, we outsiders are bringing power dynamics, biases in that might perpetuate some of the power dynamics, colonial dynamics in these environments. And it is really important to be aware of that, right? So for us, coming into this region was important to say, okay, where can we be most useful? And that is not to just bring our knowledge on top of these people, but learn from them and work together to find solutions where we can mix skills that everyone brings to the table, learn from each other, and then multiplies those voices together.
One of your lectures, you talked about how people in their countries will send things to refugee camps that are beneficial to them to send. So you talked about how Amsterdam was sending bikes to the refugee camps, and how in other countries would send clothing, but there was a problem with what they were sending.
Exactly. I mean, imagine what used to be like a humanitarian aid form can be, reused, recycled bikes from Amsterdam's canal, or clothing donations that we think, great. There's all this second-hand clothing that no one is using. Maybe people can use it there. It's for free. But in fact, when you look at it, it's trash. We are sending them out trash, and partly this trash is also absolutely culturally inappropriate. Which Syrian woman is going to wear tight, skinny jeans? It's not something that can be useful in the context. So you see in some of the images, we have worked with this trash to kind of transform it and make something kind of both critical and transformative.
In this conference, we talk a lot about innovation, and you just wrote this really remarkable book about innovation that was going on in these refugee camps. And one of the things I really appreciated was how you took what they would probably consider finding ways to make do and appreciated the real innovation in architecture and design behind it. So can you talk to us a little bit about how that changed or how we should look at innovation given that?
So when you look at the ways in which people in the camp, and look at this fountain, for example, this is made out of plastic buckets, made out of trash to create a feeling of sound and remind people of their home and also alleviate some of the unbearable heat that you find in these camps. It is a kind of, not necessarily solution to something, but it addresses a specific need, a need that is not recognized by our parameters of what constitutes humanitarian, like human needs in the humanitarian design. Those seem to be, in the eyes of the kind of international community, based on parameters of efficiency, engineering, kind of addressing needs of people in a very short period of time. And those needs are seen as needs for shelter and water and food. But when you see what people are making in the camps, you see that they are making cultural artifacts, inventions, innovations that are talking about those cultural and emotional needs that are actually essential human needs. And I think we ultimately need to reevaluate the way we think about aid in this context, and we can learn them best from those communities affected by conflict and crisis.
And our last question, or what are some of the examples of innovation that you saw, these cultural things that really inform so much of your work of saying we need to look at not just as a person that needs something, but as a human who brings their culture and their tradition and their identities with them?
So in the images, you have seen a photo of this Palmyra arch, like a sand castle that someone has built in front of the ready-made shelter built by UNHCR. This, for me, is such a powerful image because it juxtaposes these two ideas of shelters, right? So you have in the background the kind of standardized one-fit-all solution that is giving people like roof above the head. And then in front is this amazing sand castle built out of different parts of sand that the person scavenged from the desert to reference Palmyra, place where they come from, but also to create a kind of monument in a place where no public space and no gathering is allowed. And this becomes a landmark for people to gather, for young people to learn something about history, and the elders talk to the kids about this, this used to be in our home. You indeed have history, you have identity, you have dignity, right? And this, for me, is such a powerful lesson that we need to learn, the lesson about dignity and the kind of expression that is so vital to us being human beings and having those needs.
Really fantastic things to keep in perspective at this conference. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron Slater. Thank you.
Yate, my name is Aaron Slater. My clans are Kia'ani, Naizdina, Tsenachini, and Sotanaa. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, and here at Solve, I work with my fantastic colleagues here at Solve and folks from around the Institute to lead the Indigenous communities work. Over the next 3 days, we will hear from some amazing Solver teams and partners who are working together on meaningful and innovative solutions to critical challenges in communities around the world. For those of you who are interested in diving deeper on these topics, consider joining us for the Indigenous and Anti-Racist Innovators Summit in Minneapolis, Minnesota on June 16th and 17th. Yeah, let's give it up for that. I'm excited to see you there. But for right now, I'm deeply honored to introduce our first Solver Funder fireside chat between Kristen Welch, founder and executive director of the Waking Women Healing Institute, and her partner at Vodafone America, Jun Sugiyama, director of Vodafone America's Foundation. Waking Women works to protect against, heal from, and illuminate acts of settler violence settler colonialism that result in violence against indigenous women, girls, two-spirit relatives, as well as violence against the lands and waterways of this country. Kristen and her team are working to restore traditional matriarchal roles, governance systems, ecosystems of care that will ensure the health of mind, body, spirit, and emotion of this generation and generations to come. This is an especially meaningful conversation, given that today, May 5th, is National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Two-Spirit, and girls. Please join me in welcoming Kristen and June to the stage, and please join us in supporting this essential work. Yeah, thank you.
Well, Kristen, it's an honor for me to be here with you today. I'm inspired by your work at Waking Women Healing. So you're an MIT solver, and you won the Vodafone Americas Foundation Innovation for Women Prize for the Story Map project. So I want to talk about the project and the technology that it uses to tell stories about missing and murdered Indigenous women. So that's MMIW. And we also have a very unique relationship, so I want to talk about that. So we have a lot to cover within the short period of time. But first, though, I want to talk about today. Like Alex said, today is May 5th. It's a very important date, and it's significant to your work. So can you lead us by talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, first poso maunawiak, hello everybody. So today is the National Day of Awareness for MMIW, or Missing Murdered Indigenous Women. It's a day of action, of healing, of grief, but I think more importantly, resistance for us as Indigenous women to bring awareness to the rates in which we go missing and murdered, especially here in the US, it's 10 times higher than the national average. But it's a day of action and healing for our families to break through silence, intentional silencing of us as Indigenous people. So it's a call out to the world, to society, to change, to do better, to take a really deep look at yourself as institutions and what you're contributing to the epidemic of MMIW.
You know, I noticed that storytelling is a big part of your work. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, I think as an Indigenous woman and Indigenous people, we're rooted in storytelling, especially storytelling that's connected to the land. She's our mother. She provides everything for us. So Arcgis and Story Maps was like this really natural transition to bring awareness and visibility to Indigenous women and the violence that we're facing. And it tells the stories of our family members who are boots on the ground fighting against systems for visibility and action. They're on the ground when their family members go missing and murdered, creating search teams because law enforcement is not doing that. They're on the ground contacting senators and legislators at the state and federal level saying we need policy change, we need system response, we need the FBI to investigate our murders, and nothing's happening. So it's that story and that work that we want to highlight. We want to create sort of this space where other grassroots Indigenous people can find a hub, a source of how do we do this? How do we fight this big problem, this 500-year-old problem of systemic racism and colonialism that leads up to this problem? And the Story Maps allows us to do that. It can show the gaps in responses from law enforcement. It can show us how to improve those responses, and more importantly, how to grow movement that protects the future for that 7th generation.
You know, your storytelling really resonated with me, both personally and professionally. You know, through the recent pandemic and the rise of Asian hate, I was on a panel discussion, and someone from the audience asked, said, Asians need to speak up more. And when I heard that, I was really crushed because I felt like Asians have been speaking up since the early 1800s with the Chinese Exclusion Act, the internment of the Japanese American, of which my father was also imprisoned, the murder of Vincent Chin, and so much more that's happening. So I think, you know, people don't really want to listen, or it's hard for them to hear what the truth. But you put it in really clear sound bites. And I think that's what your project does. So this is the exciting part. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your project.
Yeah, we use Arcgis Online and story maps to collect data that just really doesn't exist for Indigenous people. That was like the first problem, is we're invisible in the data, we're invisible in the media. So it makes it really hard to get engaged in a problem that people know nothing about. You know, there's that intentional silencing. So as an Indigenous person, having data sovereignty and being able to tell your story through these interactive maps, from doctrine of discovery, that's the, you know, the root cause of how we got here was an intentional land theft, all the way up to how the system upholds that violence against us today, whether it's the foster care system or resource extractive industries. And it engages the hearts and minds of people. It gives you the stats and the data, but it's the story, the connection to the heart level, that we're real human beings that this is affecting. This isn't a historical problem. It's still ongoing and happening to us today, and here's how you can get engaged.
Like I mentioned, it resonated with me, not only personally, but professionally, and I felt an urgency to reach out to my employees, and so in turn, I reached out to you. Can you tell us all about, well, can you share how our relationship was?
I think between a nonprofit and a partner, Vodafone Foundation and yourself, June, that was our ideal, like, dream relationship, where they listened to you, you listened to what our problems were, what our needs were, you understood as Indigenous people how much we're carrying in our backpack, that it's not just this solution, that we're tending to community, we're tending to suicide, we're tending to resource extraction, we're fighting for the land. And you simply said, how can we take some of that out? And you were very stern about it, like, no, we're gonna schedule this, we're gonna find you funding, we're gonna help you, and that's what we need, is people to stand in it with us to get engaged. And I think the relationship was built on trust, that you know and trusted us to do what we needed to do with the funding and supported. But you also, it wasn't just funding, which is extremely important, but it was media relations and technical assistance, and here's how we can support you.
Yeah, I know our employees were really moved by your story. I mean, and we were happy to do some soul searching to see how much more we can do, what we can do to support you. And, you know, like you said, you know, money is one thing, but for example, Vodafone is an international technology company. You know, we can leverage our global reach, our critical mass of employees and customers, and their expertise in engineering and, like you said, human resources and marketing. So, you know, how else do you think companies can help?
Decolonize. Simply decolonize yourself. I think taking that internal look at yourself and really looking at your budgets and your funding streams, are they coming from banks that support resource extraction? Are you really willing to look at the policy and the way you're built and moving? Is it gender biased? Is it racist? Whose land are you on? And are you supporting those people? For me, that's the biggest thing, is decolonize yourself and make sure that you have BIPOC and Two-Spirit people at every level of decision making within your company and institution and corporation.
Well, Christina, it's always a pleasure to speak to you, and I'm sure it was the same with all of you. There's a lot of companies, people from companies out here and listening online. I hope that sharing our story encouraged you to do a little bit of soul searching to see how you can help. And talk to your solvers if you can. And in the next couple of days, if you run into Kristen, please stop and have a chat. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Ravana.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, June and Kristen. What a special and inspiring conversation to have, especially given the importance of this day. And I wanted to for you to all hear this conversation first before I proceeded with reading MIT's Land Acknowledgement. And so let me go ahead and do that now. In exploring and writing about the imagined foundations of society and a culture, we feel it is necessary to acknowledge the very real foundation of our own. We therefore acknowledge the indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land where this event is taking place, and the enduring relationships that exist between them and their traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse indigenous people connected to this land, of which we gather and perform from time immemorial. Thank you. For our next segment, I am honored to have had the chance to moderate a conversation a few days ago with Yuval Noah Harari and Sergei Plokhy. In the time that we had together, we knew there was much to be covered, from the current events in Ukraine to the exploration of human evolution and the meaning of ethical innovation. And we tried hard to get it all in. So we've prepared right now for today an abridged version, and you get, yet again, this exclusive preview. And if you want to hear more, you're able to watch the full-length version of MIT Solve's website. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And then following this segment, we'll look forward to welcoming MIT's own alumnus, Noubar Afeyan, co-founder and chairman of Moderna, in conversation with Linda Henry. Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Alex Samuel, the Executive Director of MIT Solve. We're here today as part of Solve at MIT, and I have two very special guests with me. Sergei Plokhy is the Mikhailo Hrushevsky Professor of Ukrainian History and the Director of the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University. Yuval Noah Harari is a historian, philosopher, and the best-selling author of *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, and we're so delighted to have you both here today. So let's start with a question that I think is on everyone's mind at the moment, and which is around Ukraine. And here at MIT Solve, our mission is to drive innovation to solve world challenges and find and fund social entrepreneurs all around the world. But I think it's really important as we think about technology, innovation, social impact, to ground ourselves in history and its lessons. And that's why we've both invited you today as two wonderful historians. And so thinking about Ukraine, those of us who are old enough to remember the fall of the Berlin Wall, so the end of the Soviet Union, back in the day, we all thought this was the end of history. And that the liberal, capitalist, and democratic models had won out, and that we could solve all problems, that we could eliminate poverty, hunger, disease, that technology would be there to really help us. But really my first question is, was the last 20, 30, 40 years a period of anomaly? Is this war changing things?
So if I can go first, I would say that it depends on us. It doesn't have to be an anomaly. I mean, if you look at the last 40 years, say, compared to most previous eras in recorded history, then yes, it was the most, by many measurements, it was the most peaceful era in human history. I know there are still wars in parts of the world, even in the last 40 years. I live in the Middle East, I'm completely aware of it. But still, if you look I mean, since 1945, not a single internationally recognized country was wiped off the map by external invasion and foreign conquest, which was the norm previously. You know, for the first time in history, more people die from suicide than from human violence. That's an amazing achievement. And the best thing maybe is to look at military defense budgets, at military budgets. For most of history, all these emperors and khans and caliphs and kings, they spent most of their budget on their military. In recent decades, the average military budget of governments around the whole world is about 6.5%. And in Europe, less than 3%. Most of the money goes to healthcare, education, welfare, things like that. This is an anomaly in human history. But it didn't result from some freak changes in the laws of nature. It resulted from humans making good decisions, building good institutions, and we can maintain this. We can continue to make good decisions and build good institutions. Or if Putin wins in his endeavor, more and more of the world would look like what's happening around in Ukraine and would look like Russia. I mean, nobody knows what the military budget of Russia is because it's a secret, but estimates are around 20%. This is how a relatively poor country like Russia built this military machine. If Putin is allowed to win, we will see defense budgets all over the world skyrocket, and at the expense of things like education and healthcare. And it's a choice. In which kind of world do we want to live?
Yes, I agree with what have been said, and it is an anomaly, but it's up to us to turn it maybe into a new norm. And today we are at the point where really a lot of things will be decided for the next maybe 10 years, 20 years, or even more. Exactly, a lot depends on the way how this war goes, and more specifically whether the aggression will be stopped. Because since the end of World War II, since 1945, there was also no, at least in Europe, there was no annexation of territory by one state, territory of another. And it happened in 2014 with the Crimea. So we are back not just to 1989 or to 1991 when allegedly history ended, or at least the liberal era was supposed to arrive. But we are going back to the period of 1939, before the start of World War II. There were comparisons made between, of course, Anschluss and the annexation of the Crimea, and there can be more comparisons of that kind provided. In terms of technology, to a degree, this new world is, exactly as you all said, is the result of the wise decisions made by the politicians and the electorates, at least in democratic countries, making good choices as well. But it is also the result of the fear of the nuclear annihilation. Because 1945, that's the time when the nuclear age started, when the world saw the destructive power of nuclear weapons. And some people here in the US who worked on that bomb actually wanted the bomb to be exploded because they wanted to scare the world. They wanted the world to know what kind of enormous power the governments would have from now on. And today we are in an age where there is a cavalier attitude toward nuclear weapons. There are much more drivers on the nuclear highway than there was back in 1945, 1962, or 1989. And that is a major challenge, how, again, to turn technology to serve us as opposed to allow that technology to destroy us.
I'll just add to that many people who develop or are at the cutting edge of developing technology today, they sometimes see technology as being above history, as being free from history, or able to just shape history any way it likes, and it's not the case. Technology is always not just developed, but used in a particular context, in a particular historical context. History doesn't end, it doesn't go away. And you know, when you develop a technology, a good exercise is to think about the politician you most fear in the world and to think what he or she will do with the technology I'm developing. Not only about the best case, not only what you are thinking of doing with your technology, also what they are going to do with the technology. And also, again, history is usually, never moves in a straight, simple line. You know, people expected this war to be this kind of cyber warfare with, I don't know, special forces jumping out of the screens and whatever. And in the end, we do have cyber warfare and we do have very new phenomena. Like people, you know, in the Spanish Civil War, you wanted to join the international brigades, you had to go to Spain. Now you can sit in San Francisco and join the international cyber brigades and help fight the war. But having said that, the war itself, it looks so much like the old war, like the old world. And you know, Molotov cocktails and not cyber weapons have been far more predominant. And it's just not just in Ukraine. You know, in California, people have all these dreams about a new virtual world and all these wonderful technologies. But one of the biggest political projects, at least in terms of the attention it got, in Southern California and the whole of the Southern United States, was building a stone wall. This is Neolithic technology. And so you have the Neolithic age and the digital age side by side. We don't leave it behind. It always goes together.
Absolutely. Just one thing to add to that. Already in Ukraine, they talk about this war as a 19th century war that is very often fought with 21st century weapons. And there is just this bridge between 19th and 20th century in one place in one time.
I want to rebound, I think, on one of your comments, Yuval, about and a good advice for our MIT and SOLVE audiences about, as you design technology, thinking about the worst politician and thinking about how they might use that technology. I think that's really good advice for our MIT and SOLVE audiences. And I want to expand, if that's okay, from the conflict of Ukraine and this current geopolitical era to dive a little deeper in this piece about technology. And indeed, I think that the history of humanity is also the history of technology and technological development. And, you know, I'm an optimist, and I like to think that overall the technological progress leads to human progress and leads to good things. But there's definitely, technology also causes and has caused throughout history existential threats. Today, I think, so, or at least personally, the ones that I see are around increasing inequality all around the world, driven by automation and AI, nuclear disaster, which we already talked about and started referencing, and of course, climate change. So I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics if we have time. And as regards inequality, you know, there's sort of the centralization of power and resources has been throughout history yet again a way that empires function. And today we see continued and increasing inequality and concentration of power in a few people and a few corporations. And you know that seems similar to the Gilded Age. And so so I'd love to think about, is there parallels between these two eras, and how do we extrapolate the lessons around inequality from the past to think about how technology, instead of exacerbating inequality in some cases, may in fact reverse that or advance opportunities for all?
The parallel with the Gilded Age is really a very, very productive one. And again, this is a parallel about this growth and equality and concentration of resources and money in the hands of very few. But I would say that we are in a worse place now than we were during the Gilded Age, so the last decades of the 19th century. Because during the last decades of the 19th century, you saw also the growth of the real wages by 60% in the last decades of the 19th century. I don't think that we're actually doing as well now. So the situation is worse than it was during the Gilded Age. The question is whether development of technology is responsible for that. To a degree, yes. Technology is very often responsible for good things, for bad things, for the best of the things and for the worst of the things. It all depends on the society. It depends on what we do with that technology. And technology that we have today and that we have now, it seems to me provides the opportunities for the countries that otherwise would be maybe poor, would not be competing with the major powers or the imperial powers, compete. And that's especially true, it seems to me, for IT. And look where the main hubs, IT hubs now today. Some of them are really in the so-called developed world, but others are in the world that is developing and sometimes lacks other resources. So it is not the Gilded Age of the 19th century when you really needed an iron ore and you needed coal and things like that to participate in the world exchange. Now what you need is brains and education. So, but this is the technology gives us opportunity to be better than we are today and not as bad as we are. Again, looking back at the turn of the 20th century, we were in a better shape then.
I think that I completely agree that on the one hand now, you can have a high-tech hub anywhere. You basically need knowledge. You need human capital, you need brains. You don't need steel and coal and so forth. The other side of the coin is that it also makes it much easier to concentrate all the power and wealth in just one place. For much of history, we always saw these inequalities, but you know, when the main economic asset was land, you just can't concentrate all the land in one place. It's a physical impossibility. Also in the industrial age, when factories and machines and coal and steel and all that, they became the main economic asset, still, you couldn't concentrate all the production in one place. It was a physical impossibility. So you couldn't move all the production just to Britain or just to Japan. Now, with the new digital economy, the main assets are on the one hand, the knowledge of professionals, and on the other hand, it's data and it's computing power. And the thing is, you can concentrate all of them in one place. You can concentrate all the data of the world and all or most of the computing power of the world in just one place or a few places. And the more the economy depends on these resources, if we don't take counter actions, we might see the creation of the most unequal economy and therefore unequal system that ever existed. You know, it's not just where you develop things like artificial intelligence. It's also things even like the textile industry. Now in the textile industry, the most important thing is not the cotton fields, and it's not the factories, it's the data. It's the data about what the consumers want, about the latest fashions. So we can see that even in a very traditional industry like textile, we might reach a point when all the key data is in the hands of just one or two companies, let's say Amazon and Alibaba, and that's it. So that's a very big danger we need to take into account, which never existed before. And it demands active, I mean, if we just leave it to itself, it tends to grow even more extreme. Data comes to data and wealth comes to wealth. So to make sure that countries like Ukraine, like Egypt, like Sri Lanka, which is now really collapsing, would still be in the game, we need some kind of global safety net and a better distribution of the dividends, of the profits of the current technological revolution between the whole of humanity, and not allow them to be concentrated in just a handful of countries.
I want to move on, if that's okay, a little bit looking forward to the future and hopefully some hopes and advice for our community of technologists and innovators who are devoted to social change, this idea of sort of even looking more broadly than Europe and the US, but looking to communities across the world who may not have access to many opportunities right now, and how refugees across the world and people who are still living under $2 a day and different underserved communities, how can we think about bridging this moral distance and think about the futures for the most vulnerable among us, and how do we use design technology to help these people?
One thing should be very clear is that the people who design the technology have enormous power to shape and reshape the world, and that they have choices. You can design many different types of technologies, not just one. It's never deterministic. So for instance, you can, as an engineer, as an entrepreneur, create a technological tool for a government to survey, monitor citizens, or you can create the opposite tool for citizens to monitor the government.
I grew up and I was educated in the Soviet Union, so the only philosophy that was there readily available and we were forced to study it, it was Marxism. And one of the foundational things about this variety of Marxism that I studied was that there is development of technology and automatically it gets transformed into the social change, and social change eventually gets transformed into the political change. So stages in the development of the society, and they're driven by technological development. I didn't like that idea at the time because just it was forced on us. But I also, as I started to be exposed to different philosophies and studied history, I realized that there is nothing automatic about that. I also lived through the fall of the Soviet Union, and everyone believed that the end of history will come also with the help of technology, because authoritarian regimes can't really survive if there are computers and then access to the internet and so on and so forth. And we see today that they actually not just survived, they're doing very well. So the question is, what do we do with the technology that we develop or you develop? And the social responsibility of a scientist, of a scholar, of an engineer. And you can use the car to do all sorts of things, both positive and negative. And the issue is that in terms of social responsibility, it seems to me that the key is that the work of the inventor, of the engineer, of scientist doesn't really end with the product being ready. To a degree, some very important part of that work only starts to make the world aware about that, to make sure that this particular tool, that this particular algorithm is used in the way how it was intended by the creators.
So 3 basic rules are that my data should be used to help me and not manipulate me. That's a very old rule. I mean, doctors know it. So it should also apply to IT. Secondly, that we should never allow all the data to be concentrated in one place. This is the kind of high road to dictatorship and to economic monopoly as well. And finally, that whenever you increase surveillance, top-down surveillance, we must simultaneously increase bottom-up surveillance. So if we have a new technology that makes it easier for governments and corporations to follow us and monitor us and collect data on us, that's fine, when we balance it with technology that makes it easier for customers and citizens to monitor the corporations and the governments at the same time.
This is really good advice, that as innovators of and technologists, we have a responsibility around social impact and ethics. but that also we can, and I think we're doing this through Solve, we're as much as possible opening the doors so that more and more people all around the world can be innovators themselves and can connect to technology, and also think about ancestral technology and bring back some of the technologies that have been proved to be sustainable throughout millennia. But we're at time, so I wanted to thank you both for this great conversation. Thank you so much to you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage co-founder and chairman Moderna, Nubar Afeyan, and once again our moderator, Linda Henry.
What an inspiring conversation that was, and what a fantastic conversation we have now to look forward to with Nubar. It is wonderful to be with you again. So Nubar is the ultimate solver. He has dedicated his career to improving the human condition by systematically creating science-based innovations that serve as the foundation for startup companies. So in the business world, we celebrate the serial entrepreneur who's done, one startup, and then maybe they do another one, and then the super prolific ones will have done 3 or 4. But during Nubar's career as an inventor, an entrepreneur, and CEO, he has co-founded and helped build over 80 life science and technology startups, and he is still going. As with many brilliant, world-changing scientists, he is, of course, a graduate of MIT. So we just heard Yuval's closing that he's thinking about ethical innovation through 3 rules. Number 1, that people's data shouldn't be used to manipulate them. Number 2, data shouldn't be concentrated in one place. And 3, whenever top-down surveillance increases, so too must bottom up. You describe your work at Flagship Pioneering as always starting with the question, what if? Moderna started with an idea, not a product, for example. What are your own rules that go along with that question?
Well, thanks, Linda. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back in person. I was there in the May 19 one, last one of these, so it feels like just yesterday. So indeed, we practice a particular kind of innovation where we start out imagining what could be and trying to see if we can attach that to value, usually starting with neither science that is proven, nor products that exist, or even needs that can be demonstrated. So it's very much a future backwards way of looking at things. And even there, you have to keep in mind the degree to which what you're enabling will impact society, not just for the good, but also unintended consequences. So when we ask these what if questions, it gives us the ability to first take some time imagining what will happen if what you're imagining becomes reality. And long before you make it reality, you can prepare for it. You can prepare for it with communication, for example, so people understand what you're trying to enable. You can prepare for it by safeguards that you put in place and many other things. So I think that's an integral part of creating previously unimagined platforms. And I think the experience with Moderna is a very important one, because 12 years ago when we started asking what ifs, the questions for us were, what if a patient could make a drug, any drug, inside their body? And there was no way of doing that back 12 years ago. In fact, many people still don't believe you can do that, because they're willing to concede we could do it with one vaccine, but nothing else. But in fact, we think you can make just about any protein in the body and either activate the immune system or deactivate the immune system or fight different kinds of diseases and inflammation, etc. And when you're going to do that, you can start thinking about, okay, what would safeguards be? How much measurement capability do you need to know where these molecules are going and what they're doing, on and on. We can talk more about it. So we have our own kind of thinking about the incorporating, I'd say, almost futuristic ethical considerations, because in order to create some of these technologies, it's almost going to be too late once it's enabled, and you got to think about it in advance. And we spend quite a bit of time on that.
There are so many things on that last answer that I want to pull on. One is that you use that very scientific term, imagination. Can you talk about that role in your innovation process?
Yeah, I can. You know, I came down to MIT in 1983, and like a lot of graduate students here, I had, you know, excelled in university. I'd gone to McGill University, and you know, I was lucky enough to get in here. And at the time, I thought of the biggest kind of sign of success, like, you know, if you're a basketball player, it's how many baskets you make, how many points you score. In academic science or in research, it's, you know, kind of how right you are, how much knowledge you have, how reasonable, how good your reasoning skills are. And over time, 35 years later, what I learned is those things are kind of necessary but not sufficient for big innovations, because it turns out that, in my view, the biggest faculty we're given innately as humans is our ability to imagine. And that in addition to knowledge helping us and our reasoning skills helping us prosecute the present, it also is a companion when you're imagining a future, because your future imagination gets shaped by how well you understand the present. If you know laws of physics, if you understand biology as best you can, it governs how you're going to imagine it. Now, you might be sitting in the crowd saying, well, geez, wouldn't it be great if you don't have any of that? Because then you can even imagine even bigger things. You can imagine a world without gravity. But the reality is, or I can imagine myself being 10 pounds. But the reality is that it turns out to make practical things, you need to constrain your imagination, or at least accompany it. So anyway, why do I say that? I'm using the word imagination more times than I'm sure it's been used, at least in a scientific context, at Kresge for a long time in this hall. And yet, I believe the thing that I never learned was the degree to which imagination is something we have to invest in and allow for. Because imagination will allow you to say things that don't seem reasonable, seem completely unrealistic, unachievable, and you've got to be able to say that. Now you might say, why? And the reason is that most, I think, breakthrough innovations, this is a fundamental belief I have, and I have lots of data for it, almost all, if not all, breakthrough innovations, in my view, are not made by humans. They emerge. And they emerge through a process that is best understood as Darwinian evolution, which is variation, selection, iteration, more variation, more selection. And at some point, those cycles gain some major advantage, and they enable something that's really valuable. The people who happen to be there claim their stakes of that innovation and describe it as some unbelievable act of genius. But in my experience, a lot of this is purely emergent. That's why we call this emergent innovation. So you might say, what does that have to do with imagination? The thing that you need is to be able to imagine variations, be able to subject them to selection pressure, not only about the current world, but in the future imaginary world, and then iterate, iterate, iterate. And so my belief is, and I hope you'll consider it, that fantastic breakthroughs are the descendants of really bad ideas. If you don't believe me, go online and look at the earliest form of the iPhone that Apple worked on. And you'll see that it's about yay big, it looks like an iPad of today, but they were working on a phone. And it looks nothing like it. It's an ugly breadboard, and you would say, how could that give birth to an iPhone? And the answer is, it does, because of emergence. So this kind of descendant gain of knowledge and learning cycles in order to get to a really powerful idea. So if you believe that, the first step in that is your ability to mentally leap. If you just stand pat where you are and you just explore adjacencies, I don't think it can, in a short time frame, lead you to breakthroughs. Hence, my belief that we have to get people to be comfortable saying silly things, crazy things, argue them and defend them even though they're not real, long enough that they start giving birth to things worth innovating around. That's what I've learned. It's taken me 35 years to learn it, but that's what I've learned. Now you don't have to learn it for your own. Practice it 5 minutes a day. Ask yourself, when's the last time you said something unreasonable? And were you able to laugh it off instead of feel ashamed or have your colleagues make you feel like you don't know what you're talking about? If you can learn how to resist that discriminatory reaction to an imaginary statement, that moment you'll get a special superpower, in my view, because you'll be on your path to a fantastic derivative idea. So that's why imagination is so important.
That is such a beautiful lesson, and I like your advocacy for equal rights for imagination. You talk about how imagination is sort of really the root of innovation. And I've also heard you talk about how innovation, the way that we approach innovation right now, which is really relevant for this conference, is backwards from the way it should be. How should we approach innovation?
So it's not all innovation. So I guess I'm trying to advocate for a form of innovation that I'm describing a little bit, but let me be more explicit. So the way I view kind of innovation is that if you draw a circle around all current knowledge and all current products in a space, so you could draw a circle around anything, so that like going to contain it all in a circle. Then the question is, where do people innovate relative to that circle? Well, a lot of people innovate inside the circle. Those are called niche innovations. And they're filling particular subsets of needs that they identified because the circle is never really full. So they say, if I just do this on Tuesdays and blue, maybe I can get some people. So that's kind of one kind of innovation. The other kind of innovation is what I'll call adjacency-oriented innovation. That is, you explore the adjacent knowledge, the adjacent products, and a subset of them might have value. And that's where 99% of the money goes in. Whether it's academic innovation through grant making, or venture capital supported innovation, or large company innovation, it's largely an act of exploring adjacencies. If you have enough resource, you can diversify your bets all around the adjacency, and you don't have to bet on which one point is going to succeed. You hedge your bet. Now let's put in the element of time. You know that today's circle is going to look like another circle 10, 20 years from now. And at that point, adjacencies will be far away from today's, right? So the question is, why not work on a far out idea that's not in any zone of adjacency? And then, if you can imagine that, work backwards and say, okay, if I want to be able to do this, how do I come back to the present and find support for it? Now, I know all of you sitting here saying it's hard enough to raise money on really adjacent ideas. How am I going to raise money for these totally far out? And that's a good point. But if you could, and I'll tell you, I mean, our whole institution, Flagship Pioneering, exists to be able to do this, because we realized that if we went around 20 years ago and told people, give us money on these ideas, and they said, what are you, crazy? And we said, yes, thank you very much.
But we're using our imagination.
Yeah, we're using, but what we did is we decided we needed to have the capital, we needed to have the people, more importantly, the culture, and we need to have the mindsets and the ability to invent. And if you can pull all that together, you can do this institutionally. So I would simply say the following as a broader challenge for you to think about. In any form, when you're fighting social injustice, when you're developing a whole new product line or a whole new belief system, whatever, education, I would argue you have a choice of two alternatives, and innovation is no different. You either work in the present, and whatever future results is the future that results based on what you do today, or you first envision the future you want, you think really carefully which is the best future you want to shoot for, and then everything you do today is in support of that future. That's what I call future backwards. I think that latter gets extremely rarely used because people kind of feel like, again, like I said before, people are going to make fun of you. So that's what I mean. Innovation, the way it's done present forward, I think has certain limitations. By the way, it's also crowded, right? Because in that zone of adjacency, everybody is there looking for value. So you have to ask yourself, what's my advantage, my competitive advantage? If you're honest, you don't have much, right? Other people have money, other people can work hard, other people are smarter than you. However smart you think you are, other people are smarter than you. So what do? I resorted to my life experience, which I'm sure many looking in the room have the same, which is I'm an immigrant. And guess what? As an immigrant, you don't take any of those advantages for granted because you're not an incumbent. You're largely an entrant, a new entrant in the space. So as an immigrant, you learn to just basically fight like hell, survive, adapt, and overcome the odds. If you do that with innovation, that is literally intellectually immigrate to a far-off place, not your neighborhood, then you have this advantage in that, one, the natives will never do that because they just figure, hey, I can make money here. Incumbents love adjacencies. So your only core advantage is your willingness to leap, and this may not make sense, but if you just put it all together, I think you'll realize that if you're willing to leap, then you're going to be on your own, people make fun of you, but eventually if there's value and you find it around where you land, then you're going to be able to be the next incumbent. And then your challenge is, how do you don't let the incumbency get to your head? How do you keep staying an immigrant and leaping again and leaping again? That's kind of how we think about it.
I love the idea of an immigrant mindset and connected to entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur, because there are a lot of parallels there. You also talked about in the beginning, and these are such, you're just sharing so many great wisdom pointers that we can take with us, is that you had talked about the word ethical innovation in your first answer, and how does that connect? So the people here in this room and the people watching are setting out to find ways to help the world. A lot of your products are doing exactly that. And so I think that there's a lot of people who are saying, we're doing good work by design of what we're doing. How do you incorporate ethical innovation beyond just doing a project that helps?
Well, there's two ways to think about it. One is if your goal is having the impact on society, and you can't work in the biotechnology field and not have as your goal impacting society, because you're developing cures, you're developing prevention. So that kind of comes with the territory. The question is, can you do it in addition in a fair way? Can you do it? So if you look, for example, and we're going to run out of time here, but if you look at the vaccine development, very early on, Moderna basically slowed down our clinical trials before we even knew our vaccine worked, in order to make sure that we had much more diversity in the people who went through our trials. Never been done in the pharmaceutical industry. The diversity we achieved in our first trial with 30,000 subjects, volunteers, was significantly different than what people were showing up to get vaccinated in the trial centers. So your choice is, you delayed launching the vaccine. All of you followed how Pfizer was competing with time, et cetera. We slowed down by 2 months. They beat us by 2 weeks. We didn't have to slow down by 2 months, but that would have been an ethical burden we carried, because we would not have had a diversified group. Then we pledged in October 2020 to give away our patents and not enforce them in the pandemic to anybody working on a vaccine. A month ago, we declared that we will forever pledge our vaccines never to be applied in the COVID case in low and middle income countries. Look, we're not doing this we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. Every company, I'll say this one last thing, every company has an implicit license to operate. And that's the most precious thing it has. And if it loses that, then it cannot have the kind of impact it's worked years and years to have. That's the best way to cause corporations to act ethically. Not all the regulations, all the complaints later. At the end of the day, if people want to have impact, they're going to want to preserve their right to have impact. And that comes from considering all these things in. So we're doing that. We're going to do even more. We just announced a month ago, we're building a plant in Kenya for sub-Saharan Africa. $500 million we're going to spend building it. And we'll keep doing it. Honestly, we're doing it because we think that's our corporate responsibility. And by the way, there's 3,000 people working in the company, not 300,000 like big companies. And those 3,000 people insist that we do these things. So we're really happy to be able to have these kinds of discussions in a company that's not yet too incumbent to worry about these things.
So I'm ignoring the time because this is just such a fantastic conversation. And but the last question should be, what advice do you have to the people here who are setting off to tackle some of these really large problems? You talked about imagination. You talked about keeping that immigrant mindset approach to entrepreneur, to not being an incumbent. What other advice do you give to this room?
Why? How long do we have? No.
Well, as much time.
No. So look, I know I'm saying things that are kind of provocative and maybe may seem even aloof or unrelated because you're struggling with day-to-day issues. And I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I think in addition to everything else, mindset-wise, the thing you have to realize is, one, you have to have a core belief that what you're trying to bring to life has so much impact that all the effort and all the overcoming of these is worth it. So first of all, understand one image. Most of the value left to be harvested in the future happens to be very close to really dangerous spots. Think of this as the proximity of peril with rewards. You know, people didn't leave much value left away from peril. So when you find yourself in a survival mode, don't assume, boy, that must be very far away from where I'm going to succeed. Because in the startup world, you're constantly at the edge of utter failure or sometimes remarkable success. So one, you have to make peace with that, this surviving, thriving duality. And then the other thing is, at the end of the day, you have two things you need to have in order to be persistent, in my view. One is courage, and the other one is conviction. If you cannot state with conviction what it is that you imagine can be done and why you're doing it, then you're not going to have the courage. No amount of experts giving you advice on this and that. By the way, experts don't suggest you do big, bold things. The experts tell you to do things that they think are reasonable. So courage, conviction, where do you get that? Not just by yourself. You get that from your team. You get that from people you surround yourself with. And if you find that that's going, then it's going to be very hard to counteract the. So you got to find where am I going to get this stuff? And I'll say the last thing, which is going to sound even more bizarre being at MIT, where I've spent the last 35, 40 years now, more or less, is the following. You know, there's this notion of, I was looking up recently, the word faith. I call all of these things, what we all do, as leaps of faith, right? Leap of faith is not a very MIT terminology, right? I mean, it's like you're supposed to be rigorous measurement, but a leap of faith. So what does faith mean? Have you ever asked yourself? I'm not talking about religious faith. I'm talking about just the word faith, right? Faith is belief without facts. Belief without facts. If you cannot have belief without facts about something that you're going to realize in the future, then you're not going to convince anybody to give you the resources to get the supporting facts to support your belief. And then it's never going to be fact. So when you find yourself saying things that cause people to feel like you're asking them to make a leap of faith, you should not hide that. You should tell them, yeah, you're going to make a leap of faith. We're going to end up in a place where I think there's value. It's going to be really close to danger. So that's the risk we're taking. And we're going to try to get the most efficient way of getting facts. And if it turns out to be true, then we have created results. And that's what Moderna did, because it was a total leap of faith that you could inject mRNA in the body and have your unsuspecting cells make an antigen of spike. I mean, just total leap of faith. But the leap of faith preceded faith. And then I'll say one last thing and then I'll shut up. They'll kick me out. You know, this is a place where, when I remember when I was a graduate student here, we used to have these like Star Trek marathons, and you know, if you really want to be a geek, be in a corridor watching with a bunch of other MIT students 40 years ago, Star Trek movies, that's what I used to do. And there's a genre of literature, I'm going to call it, called science fiction. And outside of this and some other few places, that's a very unserious activity, science fiction. Like, I don't know there's any Nobel Prizes for science fiction. And if you ask yourself, why is that? It's because people kind of think fiction is somehow the derogatory topic. Well, think about what all this innovation is about. I would argue it's about creating science fiction and then working to take the fiction out of science fiction. If you take the fiction out of science fiction, you have science. And before you say, oh, no, surely that science is a different thing, it's not. Because when you go back and look at most of the major scientific breakthroughs that are reported today, there is a much, much earlier suggestion of that, except people were afraid to say it because they thought it's going to be viewed as science fiction. So for you, if you can just make peace with the fact that for a period of time, a bad idea is going to be science fiction and a good idea is going to be science fiction, and it's just a question of what the experiments show, I think that'll give you the ability to have a much bigger impact. So those are my suggestions.
Those are fantastic suggestions, all of them. So to summarize, so take the fiction out of science fiction, take leaps of faith, have courage and conviction of your ideas, rethink the innovation model, do the right thing for your company, and nurture your imagination to see what can be possible. So with that, we say thank you so much. We're going to welcome back to the stage Alex and Moyle.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was a fantastic conversation, and I hope you're all taking leaps of faith. After that, there's not much else to say. We've traveled the world together, hearing stories, ideas, and calls to action that I hope make you feel inspired and energized to go forth and help solve the world's biggest challenges in ways that practice ethical and inclusive innovation. For those of you that are part of the Solve community, today is not over yet. At 4 p.m., i.e. 10 minutes, we'll be starting with the brain trusts on health security and pandemics, digital inclusion and indigenous communities. So please head out to Kresge, and there are either walking options or shuttle bus options to go to Sandberg. For those of you who are here just for this opening, thank you so much for joining us here today. I hope this gives you an insight in the work that we do here at Solve. There are many ways you can get involved, and whether you're a student, faculty, staff member, one of our guests, there's lots of ways to get involved. You can submit solutions to upcoming challenges that we have open at the moment. And then you can also participate, if you're 24 or under, in our SolveEd program, where you can participate in a problem identification, solution design, and more. And then finally, you can help our Solver teams and Indigenous Fellows as a mentor, funder, or technical expert. Here's to wishing you all the best over the next 3 days to make impactful connections to our incredible innovators and turn all these connections into real partnerships for change. Thank you so much, and happy solving.
Thank you for attending the Solve at MIT opening plenary. Please make your way towards the exits. And Solve community, please consult the schedule for information on your